Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, the IDF conducting ongoing arrest operations and raids in the terrorist hotbed city of Jenin. This after yet another Palestinian terror attack, this time in Tel Aviv, leaving 3 more civilians killed and nearly a dozen injured. Meantime, the 3 victims from Thursday night's terror shooting, Tomer Morad, Eytam Magini, and Barak Lufan, laid to rest Sunday afternoon. And finally, amidst all the terror-related chaos, Israel's government increasingly under threat of collapse. One coalition member after the next seemingly looking for the exits. A frightful weekend beginning with terror in Tel Aviv Thursday night, now culminating with ongoing operations across Israel and Judea and Samaria. Authorities promising to exact a heavy toll from terrorists and their supporters. ILTV's Asaf Nissan reporting.
Israeli forces carrying out multiple operations this weekend in response to the latest wave of Palestinian terror that left 14 dead in just 2 weeks. Starting in Jenin, troops entering the village to arrest potential terrorist accomplices and maps terrorist homes for demolition.
כל רוצח ידע שנגיע אליו. כל מי שמסייע למחבלים צריך לדעת שהמחיר שהוא ישלם יהיה כבד מנשוא.
Further, as part of the heavy toll, Israel indefinitely closing the checkpoints around the city, especially as the terrorists who conducted the deadly shooting in Tel Aviv on Thursday and the stabbing on Nebach last week both came from Jenin.
ראיתי את אביו של המחבל מסית לעוד אלימות, מתגאה בבנו הרוצח. ראינו את החגיגות ואת חלוקת הממתקים בג'נין ובעזה. אלה האנשים שאנחנו מתמודדים איתם. לא, זה לא יחידים.
However, clashes with local Palestinians and Islamic Jihad militants breaking out. For the second straight day of the IDF arrest operations, Palestinians opening fire and throwing explosives, forcing IDF to respond, killing at least 1 and injuring several. The IDF, meantime, confiscating weapons and arresting several militants. No Israeli troops were injured. Meanwhile, in Yabad, the village from which the Beersheva terrorist comes, likewise raided over the weekend, and the IDF killing 1 suspect who threw an explosive at them and arresting 8 involved in planning terrorist acts. The IDF confiscating a cache of illegal weapons, ammunitions, explosive devices, and even IDF uniform. And then, Palestinian rioters in Shechem, or Nablus, vandalizing the holy site of Joseph's tomb, damaging the gravestone itself, among other things. And finally, Sunday morning, Israeli soldiers firing at a suspect near the checkpoint by Husan after the suspect approached the soldiers and ignored calls to stop, as well as warning shots into the air. The suspect later transferred to the hospital for further treatment.
Joining me now with more on the uptick in terror and Israel's response, journalist and senior research fellow with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, Yoni Ben Menachem. Yoni, it's great to have you with us now. A lot of attention has been paid to Jenin. What more can you tell us about the significance of this refugee camp?
It's not only the refugee camp, it's also the city of Jenin and a few villages that are surrounding Jenin, like Kabatya, Yamun. These are all became bases of terrorism. They are full with armed terrorists, Palestinian terrorists. They have a lot of weapons.
Why these cities more so than others, though?
It's almost a tradition. If you remember, 20 years ago, the IDF occupied Jenin and the refugee camp and cleared the place from the terror nests that were in the camp. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, they lost control during the last 2 years over this area gradually, and Israel warned the Palestinian Authority, you have to take care of the situation, the security situation in Jenin, because the situation is deteriorating and the military groups are gaining more power. You have to arrest them, you have to confiscate the illegal weapons. And the Palestinian Authority did not want to confront the armed group in Jenin area. There are
so Yoni, more so than that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but more so than that, there have been several connections made between Palestinian Authority Chairman Abbas's Fatah party, the Fatah-affiliated Al-Aqsa brigades, and the recent spat of terror attacks. How much responsibility does the Palestinian Authority have for these attacks?
Officially, Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen is the head of the Fatah movement.
Right.
He's not only the head of the PA, the head of the PLO, is also the head of the Fatah movement, and he's in charge of these military groups. And he has a similar problem also in Nablus. Also there on February, the IDF killed a terrorist group of the Shuhada al-Aqsa brigade who were on the way to make a terror attack in Israel. They were assassinated by the special unit Yamam before they carried out the attack. And also in Jenin, it's almost a daily thing that the IDF has to go into Jenin, into the refugee camp, or into one of the surrounding villages, that whether these military groups are preparing the attacks on Israel, the Shuhada al-Aqsa brigade, Saraya al-Quds, which is the military wing of the Islamic Jihad. They are all planning attacks on Israel.
Is blocking off Jenin the right move?
No, of course not. I'm against collective punishment. Well, what are we gaining by that? What we need to do is very simple. We have to reoccupy the Jenin refugee camp, put a siege on the camp, and as long as it takes, it might take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, go from one house to another and check for weapons and try to locate the terrorists. This is the only way to put an end to this thing.
No, so I was going to ask, are we in the middle of a new wave of terror then, or has it not even really started yet as well?
No, it started already. We saw already in Israel, we saw 4 attacks in the major cities. And if you watch, you follow the statement of Prime Minister Bennett, Chief of Staff Kochavi, they all say that Israel has managed to prevent like 20 terror attacks. And as far as I know from my security sources, there are more attacks planned for the coming weeks, and also the Shuhada al-Aqsa brigade and the Saraya al-Quds. They announced that they want to take revenge for the terrorists who were killed, and that they will revenge in attacks inside Israel. So we have a very tough period ahead of us.
Yoni Ben Menachem, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now to discuss the IDF's evolving security strategies, research fellow and expert in military strategy, cybersecurity, and technology at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Colonel Reserves Professor Gabi Siboni. Colonel, it's great to have you. Thank you. Is Israel too much on the defensive, in your opinion? Should the IDF initiate more attacks and not just respond?
Thank you. The situation is, I think, clear, and Yoni just mentioned whatever he mentioned. It is very clear that our response should be much more fierce and dynamic and active, because we know that in the North Samaria area, Jenin, and the surrounding villages, the Palestinian Authority has completely lost control of all what's going on. And Israel, with the security forces, has to conduct something similar to our previous operation, where we take control of the whole area and destroy infrastructure of terrorists there.
All right, well, so you don't think that a targeted operation might be enough? You suggest something closer to Guardian of the Walls, where we went to a degree into Gaza?
According to Guardian of the World, according to the protective shield, I suggest that we. Yeah, I suggest that we don't have to do again the same operation, but the concept is the same. We have to take control of the area and to destroy the infrastructure of terrorists within the area. We know that the Palestinian Authority is playing a game, a duality game. In one hand they say with empty words whatever they say, but in the other hand they come to the family and the house of the terrorist that was, for example, in Tel Aviv. And they come to the family and condole them and also provide money to them, knowing that the house might be destroyed. So this is again, we have to stop and to make sure that all terror infrastructure is destroyed. And it takes what it takes.
All right. Well, what more, in your opinion, needs to be done to plug the holes in the security barrier? Because as we know, several of the recent terrorists did not come through the checkpoints.
Look, the barrier is a very important infrastructure against terror. But however, if you let the barrier open and with non-controlled access, this is very problematic. It all begins with how we treat and what are our engagement rules. If people are violating the fence and people are breaking the fence, are cutting the fence and getting in. So if we do nothing and we look at them and we do nothing, so they know it, so they will continue to do it. There is no way to protect.
Are you suggesting that they engage with live fire or maybe fire warning shots?
Yes,
or what?
Yes, I suggest that we consider the rules of engagement to make sure that people do not cross the fence. And the way that nowadays there is no limitation that they will do it whatever they do. I think that the legal system will allow it if we come with a clear concept, and we should do. Yes.
All right. Well, what do you think now of Defense Minister Gantz's carrot and stick approach when it comes to restrictions and easements during Ramadan?
Look, we have become addicted to some kind of calm and peace, and we try to buy this with restriction. But this is like a hungry tiger, hungry alligator. You can never satisfy the hungry alligator. As much food you will give him, he will want to eat more. I think that we should be very strict with our response. Of course, we isolate and we isolate terror from. We do not go for try to isolate terror from innocent civilians. However, I think that opening and giving more ease and opening the route to Israel to work with no control is a very problematic way, and it will buy us nothing. We will have more terror attacks through this channel too.
Well,
that's what I expect.
Well, I mean, you suggested a moment ago that Israel conduct a deeper operation going into the West Bank, into Judea and Samaria. Some suspect that would create more terror. How do you respond?
Whatever we do will create more terror. That's the point. But we will not solve the problem. We are going to destroy existing infrastructure, and if it will be built again, we'll do it again. That's our life, and that's what we should do. We should not be intimidated by the fact that if we do it, it will make more terror. We have more terror now, so we don't have to accept it.
Colonel Gabi Siboni, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Now, moving on, following Thursday night's deadly shooting attack at the heart of Tel Aviv, the 12th, 13th, and 14th Israeli terror victims from just the past 2 weeks laid to rest on Sunday. The unified Israeli heart breaking into 3 more pieces as the mortal victims from last week's terrorist shooting spree buried in separate funerals Sunday. The 3 victims shot dead and at least 10 more injured by a Palestinian terrorist gunman who opened fire on patrons at the ILTV on Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv Thursday night. The first to be killed, Morad and Eytam Magini, both aged 27. They were childhood friends originally from Kfar Saba, and they were both students at Tel Aviv University.
ממש בשבוע האחרון, על זה שהגענו לנקודה בחיים ששנינו עומדים לסיים תואר, וכמה שמחתי להתרגש.
Morad and Magini buried back-to-back in the Pardes Chaim Cemetery in Kfar Saba at 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. respectively.
Eytam שלי, אח שלי הגדול והיחיד. אין לי מילים, והלב שלי לא באמת יכול להקל. אתה ואני נהיה בלב. זה יחד לנצח.
Meanwhile, the third victim, 35-year-old father of 3 young children, Barak Lufan. Lufan was critically wounded during the shooting but died nearly a day later of his wounds in hospital. Lufan now buried in his hometown of Kibbutz Ginosar at 5:30 p.m. today.
ואני לפחות שמח שהצלחתי להיפרד ממנו כשעוד הרגשתי אותו ודיברתי אליו.
Moving on, while most eyes are focusing on security, the coalition is still scrambling to keep it together in the wake of Yamina MK Idit Silman's resignation. With me to respond is Jeremy Sultan, political strategist and director for English operations with the Prime Minister's Yamina party. Jeremy, it's great to have you back with us. So what does Yamina make of Silman's defection, and how are you stemming the tide?
Well, what has been happening, and really we saw this from the formation of the government, then maybe it was a little bit easier, but over recent weeks it has gotten a lot worse, is really the high level of toxicity and negativity being thrown at all of the ministers, MKs, advisors, and the relevant people that are a little bit further down the list within the Yamina faction. I can tell you myself of the amount of stuff that gets directed towards me on social media, people that come up to me on the street. And I know, having spoken to Idit Silman, that of course she was dealing with it at a much higher level. We're talking about things being said to her by people who are the caretakers of her children in the various frameworks that she sends them to, not being able to go out and attend the synagogue, having people screaming at her, following her. This is just not the way that we expect the public discourse to work in a democracy.
Well, Jeremy, I mean, that's certainly the line that you and, of course, previously Prime Minister Bennett have been making. But what do you make of Silman's reasoning? She and Amichai Shikli, for example, argue that the coalition, and specifically Yamina, has betrayed its voters.
I know Idit Silman for the last decade, and I can tell you that, even last week, we did not see her saying anything of the sort. And I'm sorry, but I haven't seen anything really change from last week to this week. It is very, very, very clear that it is because of the bullying, because of the trolling, because of all of the situation of negativity and toxicity being thrown towards her and her direction and her family members and her friends. Again, I remember already from the time of entering the government, you had a list of a poster with our faces on it, with a list of family members and friends of each person. You had an actual telephone operation going on to try to influence the various people around each one of the individuals to try to get them to break. Again, just look at Idit Silman's public remarks throughout the last 10 months. She was our chief whip, the coalition chairwoman. Okay, she was the one that helped us make sure just a few weeks ago that we went ahead and passed very important bills, such as the citizenship law for national security reasons. So again, I understand that the opposition is very happy with the current situation, and they're going to try to say that this has something to do with content.
Well, and that really brings me back to my original question. How are you going to stop other MKs from following her lead, regardless of whether or not it's pressure or ideological in nature?
Look, well, first of all, we're still hoping that Idit will come back home. And I think that there is a chance for that to happen. The Knesset is still in recess for another month. There's no vote coming up. There's, of course, a list of things that have been brought to the table. If you're looking at the requests made by Nir Orbach and MK from within our faction. Sure. And again, if you look at the list of these things, these are just things that were in the coalition agreement. These are just things that were understandings between Yamina and everybody else. This is a coalition crisis, no different than any of the other coalition crises. The way to resolve them is for all the parties in the coalition to live up to the signed agreements and the understandings that have been made since the formation of the government.
Well, so then in the meantime,
we're here.
Well, Jeremy, in the meantime, let's say that nobody then leaves the government. Just to maintain, you still don't have a majority. How are you going to maintain an effective governance without that majority in the coalition?
You'll have to make surgical deals on the bills that are of most, importance to be able to get that extra vote. And again, I'm still in a situation where I do think it's very possible that Edith comes back. If Edith doesn't, there are other people within the opposition who might take over that 61st slot. Let's look at the numbers.
We'll see how it turns out then.
At 60, Netanyahu only has 54.
All right,
that is a huge gap.
We'll see how it turns out then. Jeremy, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Israeli law of return. It's a gift that often is taken for granted, but not long ago, such a choice was little more than a dream for which thousands died. So to remind us of this history, JNF USA and their partners are now opening 2 new exhibits. Welcome to Atlit. It's a detention camp turned heritage site, and we're here now for the inauguration and dedication of 2 new exhibits: the C-46 airplane experience and the Hall of Clandestine Immigration to Israel from Muslim countries. The project put together thanks to generous donations from the late Jack Greenberg, coordinations with the Society for Preservation of Israeli Heritage Sites, and JNF USA, whose Israeli chief of staff explaining that it's their duty and honor to fill Atlit with the stories of all who struggled to get to Israel and build the state as we know it today.
ולכן הייתה זו JNF ארצות הברית שהתגייסה להביא ארצה לתצוגה את מטוס ה-C-46 אשר שימש להבאת מעפילים מארצות האסלאם.
Now, if you're not familiar with Atlit, it was built in the 1930s by the British Mandatory Palestine authorities to house convicts and illegal immigrants. But given the Nazis' final solution of Jewish extermination, the inmate population quickly changed. Hundreds of thousands of Jews fleeing the Nazis in Europe made their way to the British Mandate shores, only to be either turned away or detained and incarcerated here. Under Arab demands in the 1930s, the British issued the so-called White Papers, severely limiting Jewish immigration. And by the mid-1940s, Atlit was almost entirely populated by Holocaust survivors. But survivors aside, hundreds of thousands of Jews likewise fled pogroms in Arab states like those in Operation Michaelberg. In Operation Michaelberg, led by Shlomo Hillel, some 150 Jews were brought under cover of darkness to Israel from Iraq. And thanks to Jewish National Fund USA in 2017, a C-46 commando aircraft, the same as was used in Operation Michaelberg, made its way from Alaska to Israel. And now the plane is serving as an interactive exhibit for the clandestine immigration to Israel by air.
For us, the Hillel family, it's a dream come true because it was a vision of my father to tell the whole story of the Hapala, the illegal immigration to Israel. And the whole story is also the story of illegal immigration from the Islam country, from the Arab countries.
והוא אמר, אנחנו העם היחיד בעולם שבניו ובנותיו התפזרו ל-150 ארצות ואחרי 2000 שנה חזר למולדתו והוסיף, כדי לעלות לארץ, יהודים היו מוכנים להסתכן, לטבוע בים, להיקבר במדבר. זה מה שמייחד את עם ישראל.
So make your way to the Atlit Heritage Center today and get your own first-hand look into the Jewish state's incredible and untold past. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies reported in the north, Jerusalem, and in the south by Eilat, and partly cloudy skies overhead across the center of the country. But all over, comfortable lows tonight, averaging 57 Fahrenheit or 14 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect a slight rise in temperatures for a very warm average of 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 Celsius. And that's it for today's news. But for more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to head over to ILTV.tv or to an app store and subscribe to our newsletter as well as to our news streaming platform, ILTV+. It's available on all devices and on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching. Stay informed with the latest Israel news, live programs, culture, kosher cooking, and more on ILTV Plus. Subscribe on any device now and get a free month trial. Go to www.iltv.tv, add ILTV Plus on Roku, or download ILTV Plus from the Apple or Android app stores.